The whole life of Perseus was affected by a terrible warning, announced by an oracle long before his birth. The son of the king's daughter, Danae, would kill his own grandfather. The lovely Danae did bear a child, for one day Zeus himself came to her as a shower of golden sunlight, which poured down through the tiny window. She kept the child, a boy, whom she named Perseus. The old king sealed his daughter and her son up in a chest without food or water, bolted the locks tightly at sea, and dropped the chest into the sea. Perseus grew up to be a helper of his fisherman foster father, and his mother, Danae, led a peaceful, contented life on the island. The opportunity arose when Perseus, raised as a poor fisherman, was unable to offer any wedding gift to the king and his mother. By playing on the young man's embarrassment, the king won from him a promise to bring as a wedding gift offering the head of Medusa, the Gorgon. Perseus was overwhelmed by the immensity of the task. The Gorgons were three monster sisters whose heads were entwined with writhing, venomous snakes instead of hair, and whose faces were so incredibly ugly that whoever so much as glanced at them would be turned to stone. Although Medusa was the only mortal among the sisters, she was really as well protected as the others, for it seemed impossible to find and kill her without seeing her face. Moreover, there was a good chance that he would never be able even to attempt the kill, for no one was able to tell him exactly where Medusa and the Gorgons could be found. The son of Zeus, however, was favored by the gods. Just when he was at his most disconsolate, when his quest seemed absolutely futile, a radiant being suddenly appeared before him. He wore a winged hat and winged sandals, and even his golden staff bore wings. Perseus knew that he was face to face with Hermes, the messenger of the gods. He fell to his knees, shaken that he should be so honored, and when he raised his eyes, he saw that not one but two radiant beings stood before him. The goddess Athene, too, had befriended Perseus, and together the two deities offered the youth the solutions to his problems. First, announced Hermes, Perseus needed special equipment. He could give him a sword, which the scales of Medusa could not blunt or break. Athene could give the polished shield she wore on her own breast, and by looking into its mirror-bright surface, Perseus could avoid looking directly at the Gorgons, and so save himself from being turned to stone. The other things were not so easy to obtain. To get them, Perseus would have to visit the nymphs of the north, the Hyperboreans, who lived at the back of the north wind. The only persons who could tell him where to find the nymphs were the gray-haired women who dwelt in the land of twilight. Perseus learned from Hermes the trick he would have to play to force the Gray to give him the directions he needed. The three women had among them only one eye, which they used in turn. Each wore it to see for a few minutes, when plucked it from its place in her forehead and passed it to one of her sisters. Perseus was to watch for the moment when the eye was being passed and all three sisters were blind, and at that crucial second was to snatch away the precious eye and use it was a bargaining device. He carried out his distasteful adventure successfully and soon was bound for the country of Hyperboreans. Armed with the gifts and, at last, learning the directions to the Gorgons' land, Perseus finally set out to do the deed he had promised. He approached the rocky island where the Gorgons lived with hesitation and fear, for all his instincts told him to flee. But he had been instructed well, and held all his magic weapons in readiness. Fortune was on his side, for as he swept low over the island, he discerned the huddled forms of the ghastly sisters, asleep. For a moment he was disconcerted by the discovery that he did not know which of the three was the mortal Medusa. But Hermes and Athena appeared out of thin air and quickly pointed her out to him. Carefully keeping his eyes fixed upon his shield, Perseus swooped down to the sweeping forms, and with one great sweep of his magic sword, lopped off Medusa's head. Without looking at it, he dropped it into the bag, which had magically expanded to hold the head and its still twisting serpents. Then he raced away, thankful for the special cap, which made him invisible, for the other Gorgons, awakened by the agonized death scream of their sister, pursued him into the night. Perseus set off for home, pausing on the way only long enough to rescue from a monster a lovely maiden, Andromeda, and to claim her for his wife. Upon his arrival at the island, things were not at all he had known them. Perseus could find neither his mother nor the friendly fisherman, and he soon learned when Danae had finally refused to wed the king, she had been forced to flee from his wrath. Her faithful protector had followed her. Furious at the deadly mission on which the king had knowingly sent him, and enraged at the treatment of his mother, Perseus knew what he must do. He strode off towards the king's palace. Every eye in the great hall turned to the young man as he made his dramatic entrance. The king, sure that Perseus had been killed long before, started speechless. Before anyone could recover his senses, Perseus snatched into the bag and held out the head of Medusa aloft. Everyone looked, and then all was still in the great hall. Perseus walked away from the stone figures, which had a moment before been a king and his courtiers. Later, after he found his mother, Perseus decided to go with her to Greece to meet his grandfather and reconcile the family. He was invited in his home city to take part in an athletic contest, and as he threw the discus, it was strangely deflected and struck the old king, Perseus had not escaped his destiny after all.